This video is sponsored by BitterHealth, the only online mental health service that puts you directly in touch with Janice Dickinson.
I knew ever since I was 9 years old that I wanted to model even if my foot was being cut off, even though there were corns on my toes, styes in my eyes, blood coming out of my ass. I wanted to model so much, it didn't matter. I was always happy to be there.
Greetings, Gherkins, Gherkettes, and Gherkaholics. Sorry I haven't been around for a while. I know I'm supposed to be right now showing you like the latest bookbinding project and going, oh, this is the white book, but I'm so far behind on things. Work has been a nightmare. A lot of work that I've had to do. That's not fun. What was fun, I did have the first 7th Victim show in 4 years. But again, that's one of those things that took some work. And now I'm back like revamping the 7th Victim songs, maybe for some re-recording and some new stuff. And because of that, I've had to use, let me show you this. I've had to use the analog synthesizer. And the problem with these things is when you fire them up, it takes about a week for them to calibrate before you can get moving. And I kind of suck at subtractive synthesis, so that's why I've been extra busy trying to remake sounds. Ugh, so heavy, too. It's like working with 90s equipment. You can probably hear it just clinking against things. I had a HEINRICH show I was supposed to do this week. That got canceled. That's through nobody's fault, but I had to practice that. And I had the flu, and I had that lingering flu that just would not go away. So for like 2 weeks, I was just like, I want to die. I want to die so badly. So that's what I've been up to. It did give me a chance, though, to catch up on Severance. So my wife and I like watching that on Friday night. And I was talking to some people about Severance, and I'm like, man, you know what Severance reminds me of? And I found out I'm not the first person, obviously, to make this connection. But I'm like, Severance reminds me of The Prisoner. And I started telling people this, and a lot of people were either like, what's The Prisoner? You know, that was the thing. Or when I would say, like, oh, I hope the ending of Severance is like the ending of The Prisoner, they would go, well, don't tell me how The Prisoner ends. And I'm like, what, you haven't made it that far yet? Like, how have you avoided that knowledge? So in this video, I'm actually, if you don't know what The Prisoner is, I'm going to tell you what The Prisoner is, but I'm also going to tell you how it ends and give you about my theory about what the ending really means. So those are spoilers. So if you go to this timestamp, there'll be timestamps in it. But this timestamp is where the spoilers will start. Okay, note it down, write it down. Spoilers start here, and then this timestamp is where they end, so you can just jump right over that. So The Prisoner, if you're not familiar with it, it's an incredible British TV series that ran from 1967 to 1968. There was a remake of it in 2009 on the AMC network. Let's not talk about that. The same way we don't talk about the version of The Lottery with Dan Cortese, who I believe was the Bim Bob from Seinfeld. It's just something you shouldn't discuss without getting sad. The Prisoner was sort of an unofficial sequel to a show that over in Britain was called Secret Agent Man, but it was called Danger Man. And I actually had seen, when I was young, a couple episodes of Danger Man. I'm like, hey, this is kind of cool. And then that rolled into The Prisoner. But there's an episode of The Prisoner called The Girl Who Was Death, and it's basically just something I think left over from Danger Man, but it is one of my favorite episodes, and one that I saw when I was a kid, and there's a scene involving drinking in it that blew me away. Even as a little kid, I was like, oh, I get that. That's quite clever. Patrick McGoohan is the man who starred in The Prisoner and Danger Man, and he was doing Danger Man for like 50 episodes, getting kind of bored with it, and he's thinking about leaving, and he was at a party, and somebody said to him, well, what does a secret agent do when they retire? Meaning, what are you going to do when you stop doing the show? And he thought about it, and he went out and he actually sought out somebody from MI6. And the person from MI6 was like, oh, yeah. Oh, when one of them retires, what we do is we give them a nice big house in the country, really nice car, and a lot of walking around money so they don't go over to the other side. And Patrick McGoohan was like, oh, that's interesting. And as he walked away, the guy from MI6 said, be seeing you. And that sent a shiver down his spine and gave him the whole idea for the series The Prisoner. So, and Patrick McGoohan, by the way, if he looks familiar to you, you may have seen him. He was in Scanners Boom, one of my favorite movies. He was also in Escape from Alcatraz. He played the warden, like the real snotty uptight warden. He was in a film called Ice Station Zebra, where he kind of plays like a secret agent guy sent on over. And he's Longshanks in Braveheart, which means that he had to work with Mel Sugar Tits Gibson. So that we all have our cross to bear. Not making a reference there to Mel's Jesus movie. All right, so Patrick McGoohan, actually, he died in 2009, which was the same year that the AMC had the remake of The Prisoner. So maybe he saw that and just keeled over. But he was like a really intense actor. That's the polite way of saying he was difficult to work with. One of the things you'd see a lot of actresses over the years would say, yeah, he wouldn't do any love scenes. Like there'd be a kissing scene between us, and he would turn his head and stuff. And I always thought Patrick McGoohan was gay, just didn't want to, kiss the actresses. No problem with that. But I know lots of gay actors who will do love scenes with someone of the opposite sex, but no. Actually, it turns out he was really devoted to his wife and would not even kiss another woman on screen, and that's quite interesting. I'll have more Patrick McGoohan trivia for you later. So this is my fourth time watching The Prisoner all the way through. I'm right now, we're coming up on the last 2 episodes of rewatching it. I first watched it when I was a little kid. It was one of those things that just kind of popped up when you're a kid, and you've got like 4 channels. When you're channel surfing, you have like anywhere from 4 to 6 channels. Sometimes there'd be some UHF channels, but they'd be kind of blurry and wavering in. And it's just one of those things when you're a kid and you kind of find it on PBS, and you're like, ooh, this is weird. So I think I found Danger Man first. And saw a couple episodes of that, and then The Prisoner was on. It's the same sort of way that I found like Doctor Who, or my mom turned me on to Monty Python's Flying Circus. So that was the thing I loved as a kid. There's also a show called The Starlost. I could do a whole episode on The Starlost. The Starlost was a weird, I think, Canadian series. Well, I think Canadian. And it was, I think, Harlan Ellison started like writing the pilot episode. Maybe he wrote the first couple episodes. And then there was a writer's strike in Canada, and the series had to be finished by Canadian high school students. And they danced around that subject by saying, well, they're honors students. But yeah, they were not good TV writers. By the way, the Monty Python, I loved Monty Python as a kid. My whole family loved Monty Python. And I remember once my mother being in the grocery store, and this woman, she's talking something about how much, I forget what I referenced. And my mom says, like, oh, he loves Monty Python. And the woman got really upset. Someone knew my mother. She said, well, I would never let my children watch that show. And my mom said to her, yeah, but you're the kind of person they're making fun of. And the woman goes, exactly. And I just remember watching this and thinking, there's a lot going on here. So, yeah, that's my childhood in a nutshell. It's a good thing my mom didn't tell her that we all watched Mary Hartman together. Another show I could do a whole episode about. Also, this is another side story about television, grocery stores, and my hometown. And Joe denies this story happened. But I tell you, he told me this story when we were teenagers. I stand by it. When Joe was was like 14 or 15, he was in a grocery store, and he heard 2 women talking. And this is in the 70s when you first began to see African Americans really being prominent on television. And these were 2 old racist white women. And one of them was saying, well, if I see one of them on television, I get up and I change the channel. Now, this is before everybody had remotes, or foin snappers, as we called them in Coatesville. And the other woman says, well, if I see one of them on TV, I get up and I turn off the TV. And Joe just thought, that's stupidity. That level of racist stupidity was hilarious. So, yeah, if you need to know anything about our hometown, that's it right there. So I first started watching The Prisoner when I was a kid, and I don't know how much of it I got. I would just sit there and go, wow, this is cool. I watched a lot of TV when I was a kid, and it's weird. I know people say you shouldn't let your kids watch TV, but I've spent a lot of my adult life explaining things like basic science, current events, history, stuff like that to people who were not allowed to watch TV as a kid. So it definitely not watching TV didn't make them smarter. In fact, this is a story I've never told before. When I was like 2nd or 3rd grade, we had a student teacher in, and I guess they had to write papers or do something about some of the students they were working with, and she chose me. Now, wasn't a particularly bright child, want to get that out there, but I guess I had a big vocabulary and I knew what was going on in the news. It just interested her. So she brought in my mother. And so they get talk. I'm sitting there, and I'm like, 8, 9 years old, maybe 7, I don't know. And they're talking back and forth, and the woman's talking about my vocabulary. And said, well, the other day he used the word resemblance. And my mom's like, yeah, he saw that he learned that from an episode of Beverly Hillbillies, or rerun. And the woman got really upset. She said, well, he watches a lot of TV? And my mom's like, yeah, we watch a lot of TV. She goes, well, you don't read to him? And my mom is like, look, I work for a living. I'm a secretary. I had to take off time to come in for this. His father's a steel worker. We don't have a lot of time. And basically went on to tell the woman that a smart kid who watches TV isn't going to get any less smart. A dumb kid who reads a lot of Shakespeare, or is given a lot of Shakespeare, probably not going to get any smarter. It just really upset the woman. So, yeah, I think she just left that meeting with a broken heart. I don't think she ever wrote the paper about me. So I guess that shot a hole in her thesis. Moving on, I just want to move on from my sad childhood to my depressing 20s. When I was in my 20s, they started showing The Prisoner again on PBS here in Philadelphia. And I think it was the only one, everybody's fascinated with it. I think it was the only one who knew, had seen all the episodes and knew what happened. And there was a guy in a band. He was a difficult human being. There's a guy in a band here in Philly who was obsessed with The Prisoner. So if you would call him, it was on like 7 p.m. on Sunday night or something. You call him then, he would go, call back later, motherfucker, The Prisoner's on, and hang up on you. So people would call him and record him saying that. I think he got sampled and used on a lot of stuff. But he basically would get upset about it. And everybody knew I knew how The Prisoner ended. So they would say, Rodney, call him and tell him how it ends. And I did not have the heart to do that. Looking back on it, maybe I should have, but considering I think he had access to explosives, probably a good thing that I didn't. In my 30s, Prisoner popped up again. So like I said, it was my 4th time watching it through. 3rd time watching it was in my 30s, and this was a little twist to it. The Sci-Fi Channel they would show The Prisoner, but they also had, if you were computer savvy, you could log on and you could make comments, and the comments would run down the side. They were really good. You couldn't do that today. Today, like all sorts of alt-right people would get in there and ruin it, and you wouldn't have any fun. But back then it was really fun. I actually found the webpage of the guy who used to monitor all that, who was the admin for that. But I enjoyed the hell out of reading the little comments. They used to have an ad that they ran all the time. Like, when I say all the time, I mean like every 15 and a half seconds on the Sci-Fi Channel for pizza on a bagel. When pizza's on a bagel, you can have pizza anytime. And it would run, it just became like your mantra in your head. And at one point on The Prisoner starts to make some food, and all of a sudden the comment section just lights up with, when pizza's on a bagel, you can have pizza anytime. It was one of the highlights. I think it also, Harlan Ellison, who I mentioned earlier, I think they would have him on to give little running comments about The Prisoner, which... I hope I'm remembering that correctly. One of my favorite things, Harlan Ellison, other than writing one of my favorite little short essays called Our Little Miss, he was talking, they would have him on Sci-Fi Channel, again, little snippets of Harlan, and he was talking about speaking to a bunch of college students, giving a lecture, and he mentioned Dachau. And one of the students afterwards in the question and answer period raised his hand and goes, you mentioned Dachau or and Harlan Ellison said, Dachau. And the guy's like, yeah, what's that? And Harlan Ellison got furious, as he should have. And he's like, raise your hand if you don't know what Dachau is. And all these hands go up. And he begins unloading on these college students. And I agree with him. He should have. If you make it to college and you don't know what Dachau is, you have a problem, but also it explains partially why we're in the mess that we're in. Harlan Ellison was an angry old man, and God, every day I understand him a little bit more. So right now, on my fourth viewing of The Prisoner all the way through, it turned up on, and this was synchronicity, because I've been talking about it to people, and then all of a sudden my wife sent me a thing, because she gets the subscription emails from the stuff we subscribe to. We subscribe to Night Flight, and Night Flight showing all of The Prisoners. I'm like, wow, I was just like talking about like 5 minutes before the email comes in, and I'm like, yeah, I get to watch The Prisoner on Night Flight. I love Night Flight going all the way back to when I was in my teens, because Night Flight was where I would learn every week that the Eurythmics were a duo consisting of Dave Stewart and Annie Lennox. They would say that all the time. And they're like, Night Flight takes off to synth pop. The Eurythmics are a duo consisting of Dave Stewart and Annie Lennox. So it was something, it was like their pizza on a bagel. They would just repeat it over and over again. So yeah, it's fun to see it now and watch it. I'm on the last two episodes. I've kind of been saving those. So the episode before that was, again, one of my favorites, The Girl Who Was Death, which is kind of a weird comedy episode. But now I'm into the last two. So now I'm going to regale you with some trivia about The Prisoner. Very short, because I know sometimes the trivia things are a little annoying, but I know this stuff, and it's taken me since I was a child to find it out. All right, talk about Rover, and this is why I started thinking about, when I was talking about Severance, and I was talking about The Prisoner. In Severance, there are these balloons that kind of follow people around. I was watching, like, that reminds me of Rover from The Prisoner. So if you ever saw The Prisoner, and again, not much spoilers here, but Rover was a giant balloon that would follow you, and when it got a hold of you, it would suck you inside of it. And the original idea for Rover, and I heard this story for, I don't know, like 40 years, 45 years. I heard this story, and I didn't know if it was true. I thought it was just BS, and then I found out recently this is true. So what I'm telling you is true. I've seen the pictures. They had Rover. They had built this thing called Rover, and they're supposed to be able to go through the water, under the water, climb walls, fly. They're supposed to do everything. And the BBC people deliver Rover to the set. Now, they're filming, and Rover was supposed to be in, like, every shot. So they get Rover, and, like, Rover looks worse than K9 from the old Doctor Who. Rover is really disco. Rover is like a tent with a blue light on top of it, and they took it into the water, and it had, like, a go-kart for the bottom, and it sank. So the director turns to Patrick McGoohan and is like, we're screwed. And like, yeah, let's go get some drinks. So they both went and they got some drinks, and they're just sitting there trying to figure out what to do, pounding them down. And the director's like, oh, we're done for. And he looks up. And when he looks up, he sees a weather balloon. And he turns to Patrick McGoohan and he says, see that? And McGoohan looks up and instantly gets the same idea. He goes, how many of those can you get your hands on? So he called the British Meteorological Service, and by the end of the day, they had like 100 of them. I think within like an hour, they had 100 of these balloons. And they would fill it with various substances. Sometimes they mix helium and water, depending on what they needed to do. But that's how Rover became the big balloon. I'd heard that for years and just didn't buy a word of it. But no, I've seen enough sources now. I've watched enough prisoner documentaries that is confirmed. Also, I mentioned Ice Station Zebra earlier that Patrick McGoohan was in. He was doing a lot of really intense stuff on The Prisoner. He was writing, directing. He would write and direct under pseudonyms, of course, acting in it. And he just began to burn out and needed some time off. So he went off to film Ice Station Zebra. So there is an episode where The Prisoner has an entirely different face. It's really good. So some people don't like it because McGoohan isn't in it much, but I do like that episode. Also, let's talk about Leo McKern. Leo McKern played number 2 in an early episode. I think he plays number 2 in The Chimes of Big Ben. You can go check that. If I'm wrong, comment section will explode. But Leo McKern later turns up in the 2 last episodes. And in one of the episodes, which is called Once Upon a Time, the next to last episode, it's just basically Leo McKern and Patrick McGoohan. And when they filmed it, they had them locked on a fairly empty set. I think they only had like a couple cameramen, maybe a director. They had them there for 8 days, just the 2 of them. And they went a little wacky. They both became their characters. So McGoohan becomes number 6, Kern becomes number 2, and they kind of forget their acting. And at one point, McGoohan has Kern down, and he's strangling him, and he cuts off his hair a little bit. So McGoohan looks at the rushes. Now remember, McGoohan and Kern are friends. This is what Patrick McGoohan did to his friend. Imagine what he did to other people. McGoohan and Kern are friends, and so McGoohan goes and he looks at the rushes, and they're brilliant. You know, the rushes for that day, the acting's really great. So he stops by Kern's trailer to tell him, and Kern is in a fetal position, rocking on the floor. He'd had a breakdown. He had a nervous breakdown filming with Patrick McGoohan, and they had to wait a couple of days. And McGoohan's like, oh, come on, it wasn't that bad. He came back. And I guess he did forgive him because he did come back to film the sort of final episode. But, yeah, that's kind of spooky that he would do that to him. All right, last little bit of trivia. There's a guy named George Markstein or Markstein. I think it's Markstein. And you see him in the beginning of The Prisoner when Patrick McGoohan's The Prisoner walks in, or maybe the guy from Danger Man, walks in to resign. And he pounds his hand on that desk and everything. All right, that guy, that's Mark. George Markstein. George Markstein. That's him, and he was the script supervisor also, and I think he had, like, was also a producer. But that's him that Patrick is resigning to, and they wound up hating each other. It wound up, as Prisoner went along, that became an acrimonious relationship, Markstein was not happy about the ending. He called it a bunch of sanctimonious, self-indulgent crap. But here come the spoilers. Let's go into the spoilers and to my theory. So, if you just want to jump ahead to this mark, you can catch me saying goodbye. But spoilers begin here. All right, this is Markstein's theory. Markstein's theory was that the prisoner, the guy from Danger Man, had resigned because he found out about the village. And that the village had been his idea that he put forward years earlier. And they said, no, don't do it. It's too monstrous. And that's why he quits. And I think that makes a good chunk of sense. When I was a kid, I always thought, well, and even my entire life, so let's say I've been watching this thing for like 50 years. My entire life, I always thought, well, wouldn't that agent know about the village? And I used to think, well, maybe he knew about the village. He wanted to infiltrate it. But I actually have kind of a new theory now. And this is my theory for the ending of The Prisoner. So, if you've ever seen the ending of The Prisoner gets to finally come face to face with number one. Number one, first he has pulls his hood off, and he's got a monkey face on, and he pulls that off, and it's Patrick McGoohan. He's come face to face with himself, defeats himself, and then he goes off to London. Okay. So my theory is this, that Secret Agent Man, or Danger Man, or whatever you want to call him, he had thought of the idea for the village, put it forward, same thing that Markstein's saying, and then he, saw that they were doing it, and he resigned, quit. Now, I think what happens next is he had a mental break. Not unlike Leo Kern's mental break, but he had a mental break once he knew that was real, and everything that takes place in The Prisoner was taking place in his mind. And it kind of makes sense, because The Prisoner takes place in Portmerion, which is a town in Wales, or that's where it was filmed, this town in Wales. And there is an episode of Danger Man / Secret Agent Man where he visits that town. So my theory is that town had impressed itself on his brain, and his way of dealing with them turning his horrible idea of the village into something real was to sort of send himself there and live through the horrors of it, and eventually comes to grips with the fact that that's why number one looks like him, that he was the man responsible for all this. And then once he can face that, he kind of escapes and he goes back to his life in London. So there you go. You have my theory. I hope that works for you if you watch The Prisoner. If it doesn't work, give me your theory below, but your theory had better be as good as mine. All right, so spoilers and now. All right, so the next time I see you folks, I'll hopefully have another bound book to show you, and I'll probably be discussing, we're coming up on the 150th episode of Rodney Anonymous Tells You How to Live, the radio show, and I might just tell you how a radio show is made and the pain in the ass that it is making it. Okay, until next time, be seeing you.